Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is Two Tokens with their podcast again. And today we are talking about carbon credits. My name is Erich Schnoeckel, and I'm joined with Junaid, Rahim, and Maarten Kuulkers of Pando Exchange. And we're going to go in a deep dive into the details of carbon credits. You may wonder what carbon credits are. The Carbon Credits Working Group aims to design, develop, and implement a carbon credit token standard that facilitates efficient and transparent trading and transferring of carbon credits. And that's a lot, and you may wonder, okay, what's in it for me? And that's what we're going to talk about. Let me first give the stage to Maarten. Introduce yourself, please, and then Junaid can introduce himself later and also introduce Pando.
Yeah, thanks. So my name is Maarten Kuulkers from the Pando Exchange. I am the technical brains of the operations and based in Cape Town nowadays. I'm very pleased to be here, part of this Two Tokens working group.
Cool, thanks Maarten. My name is Junaid, also one of the co-founders of Pando Exchange. I am based in London. I think with the Pando Exchange in general, what we wanted to look at was the democratized access into the carbon credits market, especially for households, those who have solar panels and probably not realizing that they can create a carbon credit from their solar panels and not really understanding additional value that could be derived from the solar panels that they installed, probably for entirely different reasons. So we aim to give that access back to them, trying to make that whole process a lot easier and facilitate that so that businesses on the other side can offset in the moment, very location dependent. So if we're here now in the province of The Hague, or Zuid-Holland, isn't it, technically, what they can do is local businesses can see, okay, there are very localized carbon credits available, and that we can then offset our business emissions on, say, a Wednesday and being able to offset on the day itself. So that's our vision, and the two tokens.
Well, let's take it a step back first. So, if there's a lot of talk about carbon credits and what carbon credits are, and there's a lot of opinions about that. But can you briefly explain, perhaps, Maarten, what a carbon credit is?
So, what is a carbon credit? A carbon credit is a credit that you use to offset your emissions. So your CO2 emissions in this case. So your industry, your business, you have your certain emission footprint, and then you can buy a credit to become net zero. The current market, if you think about what the big carbon credit projects are rainforest projects, nature-based projects all across the world. So if you have a business in the Netherlands or in the UK and you want to become net zero, what happens? You buy a credit from somewhere in the Amazon. There's a place for these credits, so I don't want to be explicitly negative about these projects, but you can put question marks around the value of these credits for your local ecosystem, right? So if I'm emitting in The Hague, but buying a credit in Bolivia, how is that helping reducing your emissions in the Netherlands, right? So that for me is always the big question mark, and this is where you see a lot of negative press right now around greenwashing and about why this is allowed to do so. So I think that is what tokenization can help change is that if you start a proper process of tokenization and you bring that technology to everybody's doorstep and get people involved in that process, you get your buy-in and your more quality projects. Also, other funding mechanisms for these projects become available.
I think the goal is actually to make sure that the carbon credit is registered as early as possible, so that it can be traceable over its lifetime on a blockchain, right? Yeah. And then the question, of course, is who owns them? So if you have your solar panels and you create carbon credits, or you have your trees or your park or whatever the carbon credits are derived from, who owns these things?
So I think if you look at the ownership of solar panels, let's take a step back, forget the carbon credit. Yeah. What we need to tokenize first is the kilowatt hour. Right. So because that is the energy being produced, and I know the energy working group is doing a lot of work on that to make that whole tokenization process.
Yes, we're talking about the energy working group of two tokens,
Yes.
which is now going to do in a pilot phase in Ameland, where we really want to showcase that's what written down on paper can really work.
Correct. So for us, that is the first step. And then we start looking at, okay, now you've tokenized that asset. What can we do with it now? And that for us is where the carbon credit comes in, because that becomes the next level in terms of looking at the financial incentives and also looking at who actually is creating the carbon credit. So in this case, we're looking at households. They are the ones who are producing the emissions and offsetting their emissions with the energy from the solar panels. So from us, that is for our understanding is, how do I rephrase that?
So, but now I've got solar panels on my house. They're leased. And I sell my energy to the energy company. I have a contract with my company. So there's already 3 parties in there that can claim these credits, right? We got the lease company that might have in their contract that they own the credits. I as a consumer or a producer, think I own the credits, and the energy company may think they own the credits.
No, definitely, but that's double spending of that credit, right? Which is a massive problem in the carbon credit industry. So you see this. So let's go back. Let's take a nature-based problem statement, right? So you own a piece of land. On that piece of land is a tree, and then the project developer comes in and says, "Cool, I'm now managing that tree for you, and I can claim because of the management of the tree, I can now claim the carbon credit for that management process." So this is a throughout this world of carbon credits, that's a major problem. So who owns that carbon credit? Why do you own that carbon credit? How do you use it? Who gets to use it? So bring blockchain into the mix, bring tokenization in the mix, at least it becomes fully traceable. If you start thinking about the things that is happening with solar panels, bringing IoT devices to solar panels and then tracing the actual production of the energy, the actual underlying reasons on why you're actually creating that green energy or renewable energy. Then if you take that same from a consumption side, so if we take the meter readings from a household and you have a to the minute use case of this is where the energy is being consumed, this is where it's being produced. So this is the carbon credit that you can build based on it. So what energy companies are claiming are renewable energy certificates, which is another derivative of energy. So the carbon credit comes in with that household mix. So the consumption is really important in that question.
So, but that's the supply side of things, right?
That's the supply side of things.
And the demand side of things is also is quite difficult, right? So a household, how do they know what their carbon footprint is at all?
So it's easy enough to measure your carbon footprint now because you know the energy you are consuming through your smart meter. Okay. So for a household, it's actually pretty straightforward because if you just look at a household that doesn't have any solar panels, they have a meter, and that meter tells you exactly how many kilowatts you have consumed for your house, right. And also the gas, if there's gas as well. And all of that put together is your emissions for the household. So that becomes very clear and pretty immutable. I don't think anyone is disputing those numbers.
But that's energy only, right?
But that's
it's not my car or the product side.
But we're also just looking
scope 3 things.
Yeah, you need to be able to cover the scope that is confined or defined, in this case, within the household.
Right.
Start off there, and then take it from there as a next point. Maybe after that, as a household, you go and say, okay, now I've created this carbon credit. Maybe I can also look at my emissions for the rest of my life. Because it's not just cars or anything else. It's just your daily life. Who is offsetting my use of public transport if I'm using public transport?
Right. So that say that everything so we have this scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 things. Everything related to energy is scope 2, right? Yep. Scope 3 is the things that are further away, where there's a layer in between. So the transport of your goods to your supermarket, what's the
logistic side of things?
Yeah, that's, that part, for instance. So we have these solar panels on the roof. We produce carbon credits. Do people understand what the value of it is and what they really own?
Probably no, right, Maarten?
So this is relatively new, right? So I don't think there's a lot of awareness within households right now on that this even exists.
Even businesses in general with carbon credits.
So I think if you get a solar panel, right, there's a green part in you. So it's not all financial incentives. So I think there is some kind of idea that they're contributing to a greener world. Let's be optimistic there. And then, so you have these solar panels sitting, and you're sitting there, and I'm now contributing to a better world. Companies are getting financial incentives for that. Mm-hmm. Households are just sitting there being green. So I think creating that awareness, I think, is definitely part of our mission there. Also from an emitting side, right? So if you start thinking about, in the end, we are the ones responsible for all the emission in the world.
Yes, and you're going to bring, as a company, you're going to bring these people together. People that has a surplus and people have a demand in carbon credits, right?
Yeah, correct.
That's basically what your goal is to make. But then you still need to build on that awareness, where you say people don't have at the moment, because if you don't know you have it, you can't sell it. You can transfer it.
Even if you want to try and create that carbon credit yourself, that whole process probably takes you months and months to figure out how to actually get onto a registry and going through the hoops and process to verify your emissions, all of that.
But to take us through that journey, then how does that work?
Maarten,
as
the architect of our.
Now, so for a household, it's pretty simple. So when we're talking about us, it is a simple sign-up process, and then giving the exchange access to the readings of the relevant devices, right? So your smart meter, your inverter, depending on which country or jurisdiction you're in, right? So it's also like every country is a different ballgame there from that perspective.
Yeah. We also bring the energy mix into account, so each country varies based on that. That's essentially a factor that is applied onto the emissions or like the total credit, because if maybe in certain countries which are far more leaning towards fossil fuels versus renewable, that will end up being far more interesting from a creation of a credit perspective that you are using solar, because that's driving a green mission more. If in the Netherlands, I think it's a bit different here.
So I'm South African nowadays. So
so my Dutch co-founder with.
So in South Africa right now, it's really strange, right? So you have an energy monopoly by the state-owned company, and not a liberalized energy market. And we, I think, relying for 90% on coal. And so the whole transitioning into renewable energy is starting to gain ground right now. So it differs. So each country is different in their journey. The awareness of the people using energy is different. So it's exciting.
I think we're also seeing a bit of a liberalization of the energy markets in general. I think in the Netherlands, at least, you've got co-ops, as you said. What's happening on Ameland is a start of something quite exciting in terms of how households actually understand what their energy can do, what they can and can't do if they're selling to the grid, being able to control that to extract better value. I think this all feeds into this broader scheme as well in terms of how we drive our green agenda.
Right. Yeah, I think that especially the Ameland project is very exciting, because there it's really a community, and of course it's an island, so it's closed. It might be easier to sell something to your neighbor because you know each other, and it's a relatively small community. So, but if it works, you can expand that to different regions, different areas, different cooperations of people that want to work together in a specific area on a specific field. So that's very exciting and very interesting to see in the next, I think, half year how that will work out, and that's interesting. But we go back to these that whole scheme of creating the carbon credit and absorbing it, selling it, or using it. There's a number of parties that you need, right, and we already touched a bit upon that, the IoT device on the solar panels that is able to earmark the energy that's used in the process. But what other parties do we have or do we need in this project to be successful? And also, what are, and we might touch upon that later, what are the risks, especially legal risk or fiscal risks for future, or opportunities for future improvement of the system, or breaking it down again, what we are all building? That's a lot of questions. Questions. Let's go first on the to the process, the chain of people or devices that we need to make it really transparent and.
So let's start with the process.
Yes.
And this is what we hope through our working group to kind of land on, is what is a very much standardized process of creation and tokenization of the carbon credit, so that we understand very much, and it becomes very clear to everyone what the credit is and what the credit isn't, in terms of the energy mix starts becoming a factor, all of those different variabilities. We can then say, as a working group, we understand and we believe that we have some sort of standardization in the process being scrutinized. I think one of the great things about the working group is the diversity of different parties and expertise that can help really look at cross-border, right? Exactly, correct. Yeah. So I think that's the first part, which is the process. Second part, I think, in terms of what parties are needed to actually start making this success. Local businesses understanding what we are doing. Again, that helps through what we're doing with the 2 tokens in terms of the education. No doubt you run the expert sessions. The whole load of work goes into educating people in the community so that they understand what tokenization is. I think part of the challenge still is understanding what tokenization is and isn't. And that is very useful, because then local businesses, they can now start saying, okay, I understand this. I now understand that I can offset my emissions locally in a particular city or region in a particular time. And now I can also show very clearly that where the token has been created, what sits behind it on the blockchain, and I can then also report that out in a very clear manner.
Yeah, the word greenwashing already was on the table briefly, and that's a lot of that's the emotion people have with a lot of the carbon credits stories out there. Because the traceability is not there, the auditing is not done, or it's just a rough estimation, always in favor of the ones that need the favor, and never in favor of, I would say, nature. In this respect, the tokenization takes that away, right?
I think so. I mean, Maarten?
No, so tokenization takes a lot of that away. So you can trace from cradle to grave where it is produced and where it is consumed. Avoiding double spending. So once a credit has been issued and consumed, you can't issue the credit again. You can embed the ownership of the panels and the consumption there of that energy. You can embed it in technology and bring that out in the open. So that traceability is that the tokenization solves a lot of the traceability. And if you start thinking about using technology then to track that all and make that an automated process in itself, then so you can start thinking about expanding from an energy use case to other technologically derived credits, right? So I think the Netherlands is struggling with issues like replacing gas heating at the moment. Right. So there's a lot of the fossil fuels is going to these things. And if you start thinking about the energy from heat pumps and start measuring that information, there's a lot of things you can start thinking about. How do you fund the replacing of these massive undertakings through a mechanism like carbon credits? So carbon credits in itself have a bad name because of the poor quality of projects in the past, or
the verification.
The verification is not there. Now, so I don't want to be extremely negative, right? Because I think the technology is there to solve this. And if you start thinking about how can a carbon credit in its new form, in its tokenized form, solve these problems of funding a local problem? So
Yeah, the large companies, of course, are required to report on this, and they are capable to hire a busload of consultants to make these reports. The grocer on the corner of the street cannot do that, but also will be.
No, there's exciting new initiatives, right? So there's a particular startup in the UK that measures or monitors financial transactions and derives the carbon footprint based on the till print that you get from a payment perspective. Right. So there's a lot of things that you can bring it to the grocer on the corner and start thinking about how technology can help with calculating footprints.
And the big gains are there, right? Because there's more people in the small and medium-sized companies than in the big companies.
I said previously, so we're all emitting, right? Yeah. So as we're sitting here, what we're doing right now, we have an emission footprint.
Right.
And if you put the responsibility of that footprint back in your own hands, the same way as the right to produce these credits, because on the things that you're doing, then you start democratizing and giving ownership back to people for a greener world.
So opportunities are enormous, right? But we still have to do.
There's so much to do.
A lot, yeah, a lot. And then if you go, we are working together in this carbon credits working group with some other parties in there as well, and we still need other parties we want other parties also to join and to make sure that this is having the right representation of what's happening in the economy. But there's also a lot of risks involved, legal risks, for instance, economic risks. How do you look at that from what might be holding the implementation of tokenization back here?
I think, firstly, we've talked about ownership.
Yeah.
Who owns what? I don't think anyone really understands who owns what. There is quite a bit coming in terms of legislation as well, in terms of unbundling, and being able to unbundle and sell things separately. At the moment, if you're selling your own solar, it just goes to someone and that's about it. That transparency, so for us, that is the most pressing aspect. And from there, we can start looking at what is actually important then from the buying side. So if we are offsetting, if I'm a local business wanting to offset in the moment on a particular day, we need to also start then understanding, one, if that is actually some greenwashing involved in that is probably then the other big risk. Are we facilitating greenwashing inadvertently? We don't know. That's something as we progress through the working group, we'll also start figuring out, are we inadvertently also greenwashing, despite our best of intentions?
Yeah, so once things are tokenized and labeled, they're there, right? So you need to be able to verify the moment it enters the system.
Correct. And I think that's where we started talking about the tokenization of the kilowatt.
Yeah.
Right at source, as early as possible. That is then makes it a lot easier to actually follow the history of and the journey of that kilowatt hour, from starting all the way to becoming a carbon credit, to also then being offset by a business. Then you have that full history on the blockchain, and in theory, everyone then has a good understanding and transparency. That's what we think. But yeah, we'll be definitely working through that in the working group where there is a risk for greenwashing, because we also don't want to be facilitating greenwashing.
Yes. Yeah, I understand. But if you look at the big picture, so if everybody would have solar panels on his roof, or if every roof would have solar panels, let's state it like that, because not everybody has a roof. You live in an apartment building, there's only the top floor that has a roof. But if every roof has solar panels, what would it do to I would say the carbon credits available in society? Would we be able to offset everything there?
Probably not. So I've just got a few numbers in front of me. So the estimates are for 100 million roofs with solar by 2030.
Mm-hmm.
At the moment, we're at around 25 million.
Okay.
So fourfold is significant.
Roofs where? We're talking?
So we're talking mainly in Europe in general. So Germany at the moment has around 10% of their households. Netherlands is doing really well, around 16%. Italy is around 23%. So that is going to increase. It's not going to be significant in the sense of, let me start that again. If we look at those numbers, we can see that the creation of a kilowatt hour is going to be creating kilograms of carbon credits. We're not talking about tons.
No.
That's where, if you look at what's happening in terms of rainforest and forestry projects in general, they're talking about millions of tons in theory that they want to offset. We're talking a lot smaller scale. So your ability to offset everything is probably unlikely. And part of what we would believe as our vision anyway is carbon credits form only a portion of a larger initiative to become more green and become more renewable. So we have to balance that in terms of the expectations. This isn't going to solve the entire world, but it does allow that localization, certain things that need to be offset can then be offset. Maybe for local governments, local initiatives could be a really good use case. I think local businesses as well. Maybe for personal offsetting, that becomes really useful. But most of the pollution is coming from the much larger organizations, corporations and factories and manufacturing installations.
Airlines.
Airlines, exactly. and I don't think our intention is for those sort of businesses to be able to offset.
Okay.
Because like if you look at a plane that is going cross borders everywhere, you can't be using solar derived.
Same shipping.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, I see that. But what we're working on right now, right? We tokenizing carbon credits, tokenizing an intangible asset, actually. Once this is successful, there is no limit on taking up other intangible assets, right? This is going to be a nice showcase of what tokenization can do to intangible assets and trading intangible assets from a different perspective than we did in the past. What's your opinion on that? How would you see you as an exchange, perhaps, look at?
So I think Maarten touched upon it earlier in terms of we want to be able to think locally and think about how these projects get funded. I mean, you probably had a few examples.
I'm thinking about Ameland, right? So while we're sitting here, there's a ferry going to Ameland.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if the ferry is emitting CO2 right now because I don't know if it's a green one. So I don't want to blame them or something. How nice would it be if that a solar project on Ameland and then the ferry going to Ameland is then consuming those credits, funding the further initiatives in Ameland from a collective perspective. You think about the mind shift in this market that you can establish like that. I think that's pretty cool. That's pretty awesome.
I mean, the whole point of a carbon credit was to try and enable and drive innovation and further thinking and creativity around how we can become greener.
Yeah.
And we want to think about that as on a real local level. And if we can start doing more innovative things, maybe you can start finding ways of capturing or sequestering on a household level. Maybe some fancy innovation comes out on that. Now you start thinking about, okay, if I could do that, I can create as a household a credit based on that. It doesn't matter if I'm only capturing a few kilos here and there and somehow sequestering it. Every little bit helps because it will start then adding up as we go across communities and countries. That to us is kind of the vision in terms of where we think carbon credits at a household level can become really useful.
Okay, yeah, I see that. So we just started as a working group. We had our first meetings just before summer, and then everybody went all over the place to the sun, and you escaped the snow.
While we were working,
you escaped the snow in Cape Town. But so we really invite everybody listening, everybody also in this space, to contact Two Tokens, to contact Maarten or Junaid directly, or me directly, and talk about the opportunities we can bring to you and how you can contribute to this working group. I think that's an outreach to everyone of our listeners. It would be great if we have a lot of traction there and a lot of people that want to join and want to contribute and want to know more. And we'll be back, I think, in 3 to 6 months' time somewhere. I don't know when exactly, to report on what our process has been so far, where we are, and I look forward to see you all in the next podcast. But before we go, I'd like to give the floor again to Maarten and Junaid to perhaps have some famous last words.
Well, so I think, Erich, you're saying it is right? The working group needs new initiatives. The world needs new initiatives. I hate the term, but the world needs new initiatives and reinventing the carbon credit space. And if you have a good idea and you want to explore that within the working group, join us, please. It's been good for us. Let me phrase it like that. So
yeah, for sure.
It structured a lot of our thinking, and it's facilitating a lot of.
It's also allowed us to think more innovatively in terms of how we look at the problem at the wider scale and look at how we can come up with better solutions. So for us now driving that, as you say, over the next 3 months, let's start looking at that process. Let's start thinking about doing an MVP in a short space of time. So I'd love to come back when we do and be able to say, hey, this is going to be our MVP using X, Y, and Z with the partners we managed to bring into the working group, and have a real collaborative effort to showcase what we can do as the Pando Exchange and give a blueprint for tokenization in this space.
Great. Thank you very much for being here with me.
Thank you, Eric.
See you in 3 months.
Yes.
We talk regularly anyway.
Brilliant. Thank you.
That was it for today's podcast. Thank you for listening in, and please subscribe so you don't miss out on our upcoming episodes. If you want to get in touch with us, you can find our contact details at www.twotokens.org.